What if I told you that the history you know is built on a lie? The story of Britain doesn't begin with grand kings and shining castles. It begins in darkness, in a lost age of chaos and shadow. This is the story of the birth of a nation, a history that was almost completely erased. After 4 centuries, the mighty Remang Empire abandoned Britain. They left behind roads, walls, and cities, but they also left a power vacuum, a void that chaos rushed to fill. Imagine a land plunged into shadow, where Roman order crumbled into dust. Local warlords, Celtic chieftains, and ambitious warriors clawed for control over the fractured pieces of a once great province. This wasn't a kingdom. It was a battleground. For 200 years, from 400 to 600 AD, Britain was engulfed in what historians call the Dark Ages. But this darkness wasn't empty. It was filled with the whispers of emerging kings, the clash of swords, and the forging of new peoples. Out of this turmoil, the first fragile kingdoms began to form. In the west, in the rugged mountains and green valleys that would become Wales, kingdoms like Gwynedd, Powys, and Dyfed rose from the ashes of Remang rule. These weren't vast empires. They were small, fiercely independent realms ruled by men who claimed descent from ancient Celtic heroes and Roman officials. Their names echo through myth and legend. Vortigern, the High King who some say invited the Saxons, only to be betrayed. Ambrosius Aurelianus, the last of the Romans who led a heroic resistance against the invaders. And then there's the most famous name of all, a figure shrouded in so much mystery he might not have existed at all. Arthur? Was he a king? A general? A folk hero? The legends paint him as Britain's savior, a beacon of light in a darkening world. But the reality is far murkier. The historical record is almost silent. We have only fragments, poems, king lists, and the writings of a single monk named Gildas, who lamented the ruin of his land. While the Britons fought to preserve their world in the west, a new force was arriving in the east. Boat after boat landed on the shores, carrying warriors from across the North Sea. The Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes. Gildas called them wolves from the sea. At first, they may have come as mercenaries, hired by British kings like Vortigern to fight their own battles. But soon they wanted more. They wanted land. The Anglo-Saxon migration wasn't a single invasion. It was a slow, creeping takeover that spanned generations. They settled, they farmed, they fought. They pushed the native Britons, whom they called the Welsh or foreigners, further and further west. Small Anglo-Saxon kingdoms began to sprout along the eastern and southern coasts, Sussex, Essex, Kent. This was a clash of cultures, of languages, of gods. The old Celtic paganism and the fledgling Christianity of the Britons met the fierce pagan gods of the newcomers, Woden, Thor, and the rest of the Germanic pantheon. Archaeology gives us a glimpse into this violent, transformative era. We've unearthed settlements with a mix of Roman and Saxon styles, showing how these cultures sometimes lived side by side before conflict erupted. We found grave sites filled with swords, shields, and spears, the silent testament of a warrior society. The famous Sutton Hoo ship burial, though from a slightly later period, shows the incredible wealth and power these new kings could command. It reveals a world connected by trade, war, and gift-giving, where a king's authority was earned on the battlefield and maintained by his generosity to his followers. This wasn't just a change of rulers. It was the birth of a new people. The idea of England, Angleland, was being born. And what about the legends? The stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, of Merlin the Magician, of Camelot. Are they pure fantasy? Perhaps not entirely. These stories, written down centuries later, might be the echoes of real events, the memory of a desperate struggle against the invaders. Maybe Arthur wasn't a single king, but a composite figure, a symbol of the last stand of Roman-British culture. His legendary final battle at Camlan, where he was mortally wounded, could represent the final, tragic defeat of the Britons and the triumph of the Anglo-Saxons. The story of Arthur is the story of a lost cause, a heroic but ultimately failed resistance that became the founding myth for the Welsh people, a memory of a time when they ruled the whole island. If you're fascinated by this forgotten history, make sure you subscribe for more hidden stories. We're just scratching the surface of this lost age. The conflict wasn't just between Britons and Saxons. The Britons themselves were often their own worst enemies. Gildas rages against the sins and tyranny of 5 contemporary British kings, accusing them of civil war, murder, and corruption. They were too busy fighting each other to unite against the common enemy. While the legends speak of a united British resistance under a high king like Arthur, the reality was likely a messy series of shifting alliances and betrayals. A king in Gwynedd might ally with the Saxons to fight his rival in Powys. This disunity was fatal. Slowly but surely the Anglo-Saxons advanced. By the year 600, the map of Britain had been redrawn. The east and south were now a patchwork of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that would eventually coalesce into England. The west and north Wales, Scotland, and parts of the north of England remained in the hands of the Britons. But this wasn't the end of the story, it was a new beginning. In these isolated western kingdoms, British culture didn't just survive. It thrived. This is where the Welsh language developed, where the great epic poems like the Gododin were composed, telling tales of heroic defeat. It was in these kingdoms that a unique form of Celtic Christianity flourished, sending missionaries out to convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons. The most famous was St. Patrick, a Romano-Briton captured by Irish raiders, who returned to convert Ireland to Christianity. Later, Irish and Welsh saints would play a crucial role in the conversion of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. So, in a strange twist of fate, the descendants of the conquered eventually helped to culturally and religiously shape their conquerors. By 600 AD, the foundations of medieval Britain were set. The Romang province of Britannia was gone forever, replaced by a mosaic of smaller, aggressive kingdoms. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in the east would eventually unite to form England. The British kingdoms in the west would become Wales. The Picts and Gaels in the north would lay the groundwork for Scotland. This chaotic, violent, and largely forgotten period wasn't a dark age, it was a crucible. It was an age of fire and blood where warlords became kings, where myths were born, and where the very DNA of the British Isles was forged. The grand castles and powerful monarchs of later history all stand on the foundations built by these shadowy figures, the forgotten kings who battled for the soul of a nation in the twilight of the Roman world. The story of Britain isn't one of simple succession. It's a brutal, complex, and fascinating tale of collapse, conquest, and rebirth. Subscribe to uncover more stories history tried to hide.